My family hated me, so I ran away from them on Thanksgiving, and when they started calling me, I wanted to set boundaries. I don't know why I still try. Every year, Thanksgiving feels less like a holiday and more like a battlefield. This year, it was no different, maybe worse. My family has perfected the art of tearing me apart under the guise of just kidding or family concern, and every year, I find myself stuck at the table, picking at dry turkey while trying not to lose my mind. The day started innocently enough. I arrived at my parents' house around noon with a casserole I knew nobody would touch. I don't even like sweet potato casserole, but I bring it every year because my mom insists it's tradition. The second I walked in, I was greeted by my Aunt Sarah's fake smile and the sharp sting of her words. "Oh, Amanda, you look tired. Busy at work, I assume," she said, drawing out every syllable. She always does this, makes it sound like a compliment but leaves me feeling like garbage. I forced a smile, muttered something about long hours, and tried to slip past her, but Uncle Michael was waiting in the kitchen. "Still no kids, huh?" he asked, not even bothering to say hello. "You know, Amanda, time's ticking. You're not getting any younger." I bit my tongue. I'd heard this line so many times it barely registered anymore. Instead, I busied myself setting the casserole on the counter, only to find my sister Kelly standing behind me with that smug look she's mastered over the years. "Wow, sweet potatoes again. You know nobody eats those, right?" she said with a laugh. Kelly always finds a way to make me feel small, like everything I do is a joke to her. I ignored her and went to find my mom, hoping for some reprieve. No luck. Mom was in the living room, fussing over table settings and barely acknowledging my presence. She was too busy making sure everything was perfect for the real guests, as she once called Aunt Sarah and Uncle Michael. I offered to help, but she waved me off. By the time dinner was served, I was already on edge. The turkey was dry, as expected, and the green bean casserole tasted like it had been made last week. But the food wasn't the problem. It never is. It's the constant barrage of questions and comments that make me feel like I'm under a microscope. "So, Amanda," Aunt Sarah started, spearing a piece of turkey with her fork, "any news on the promotion? Or are you still stuck in that same position?" I felt my face flush. "I'm still in the same position, Aunt Sarah. It's been a tough year." "Well, maybe if you worked a little harder," she trailed off, shrugging as if she hadn't just insulted me in front of the entire table. Kelly snickered, and Uncle Michael chimed in with his 2 cents about how I should consider switching careers. And then there was my brother Thomas. Poor Thomas. He's the golden child, the one everyone fawns over because he's got the big house, the perfect wife, and 2 adorable kids. But even he isn't immune to the pressure. Aunt Sarah grilled him about his new promotion, and Uncle Michael kept asking why he hadn't bought a bigger car yet. It was exhausting to watch. The breaking point came halfway through dessert. Aunt Sarah was on her 3rd glass of wine and feeling bold. "You know, Amanda," she said, leaning across the table, "you'd be so much happier if you just settled down. Maybe find a nice man who doesn't mind a woman with a career. They're rare, but they exist." I froze. The room went silent, except for the clinking of forks against plates. My mom looked away, pretending not to hear, and Kelly smirked into her glass of wine. Even Thomas, who usually stayed out of these things, looked uncomfortable. "I don't think my happiness is any of your concern," I said, my voice steady but my hands shaking. Aunt Sarah laughed. "Oh, honey, I'm just trying to help. You'll thank me someday." That was it. I couldn't take it anymore. Without saying a word, I stood up, grabbed my coat, and walked out the door. Nobody tried to stop me. Nobody called after me. I heard Kelly whisper something to Aunt Sarah, followed by a burst of laughter, but I didn't turn around. The cold November air hit me like a slap to the face, but it felt better than anything I'd felt all night. For the first time in years, I chose myself over their expectations. I didn't care if they thought I was rude or dramatic. I didn't care if they gossiped about me for the rest of the night. I just needed to get out. As I drove home, the tension in my chest started to ease. For the first time, I felt free from their judgment, their expectations, and their constant criticism. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure. I was done letting them control my happiness. I didn't expect peace to last long. The silence after I left Thanksgiving dinner was short-lived, and the consequences hit harder than I could have imagined. When I woke up the next morning, my phone was a war zone. Missed calls, texts, and even voicemails from nearly every family member. I didn't open any of them. By noon, my mom left the first voicemail. She was crying. "Amanda, how could you just walk out like that?" she sobbed. "Do you know what that did to me? To your father? We didn't raise you to be so Disrespectful. Her voice cracked at the end, and I could hear the faint hum of Aunt Sarah in the background, probably coaching her on what to say. I didn't respond. Not to her, not to anyone. Instead, I called my best friend, Rachel. She picked up on the first ring. I did it, I said before she could even say hello. Rachel let out a long sigh. Tell me everything. I poured out every detail, from Aunt Sarah's snide remarks to the moment I walked out the door. Rachel didn't interrupt, but when I finished, she said, "Good. It's about time you put yourself first. They'll survive." It was comforting to hear someone on my side. Rachel had always been my anchor, the one who kept me grounded when my family made me feel like I was losing my mind. But even her reassurance couldn't drown out the guilt bubbling in my chest. By the next day, my dad got involved. Unlike my mom, he wasn't the emotional type. He went straight to guilt-tripping. "Amanda," he said in a voice that was both calm and infuriating, "you owe your mother an apology. She's been crying since you left. Do you know how hard that was for her?" I clenched my teeth, trying to keep my voice steady. "What about how hard it was for me, Dad? Do you know what it's like to sit at that table and feel like everyone's dissecting your life?" He sighed. "They're family, Amanda. They just want what's best for you." I hung up before I could say something I'd regret. Then I did what I should have done years ago. I blocked his number, and my mom's, and my brother's. That didn't stop them. Within hours, I started receiving emails. Long, rambling emails filled with half apologies and backhanded remarks. My brother, Thomas, sent the first one. "Hey, Amanda, it started. I'm sorry things got out of hand at dinner, but you really need to grow a thicker skin. Aunt Sarah was just joking. You know how she is. Walking out like that was childish and disrespectful. Mom's a wreck. You should call her." I didn't reply. Instead, I called Rachel again. "They're trying to guilt me into coming back," I said, pacing my living room. Rachel snorted. "Of course they are. That's what they do. Don't let them win." Easier said than done. For every email I ignored, another one came. Aunt Sarah wrote one, dripping with faux concern. "Amanda, dear, I'm sorry if I upset you. I only want the best for you. Maybe we could sit down and talk, just the two of us. I think you'll find I'm not as bad as you think." Yeah, right. I didn't even open the email from Kelly. I could only imagine what she had to say, and I wasn't in the mood to be patronized. The only person who didn't reach out was Uncle Michael. Honestly, I was relieved. His absence in the flood of messages was the only silver lining in an otherwise unbearable week. But the real shock came 3 days later when I received a handwritten letter in the mail. It was from my mom. I hesitated before opening it, half expecting a guilt trip in cursive. Instead, it was worse. "Amanda," it began, "I don't know what's happened to you. You used to be so sweet, so respectful. But now, I don't even recognize you. Your behavior on Thanksgiving was unacceptable. You embarrassed me in front of everyone. Do you know how hard that was for me?" I stopped reading after that. I couldn't take it anymore. I stuffed the letter back into the envelope and threw it in the trash. That night, I invited Rachel over. She brought wine and a pizza, and we spent hours dissecting every message, every letter, every voicemail. By the end of the night, I felt lighter. For the first time, I realized I didn't owe my family anything. Not an explanation, not an apology, nothing. But the next morning, my dad showed up at my apartment. I wasn't expecting him. I opened the door in my pajamas, coffee in hand, and there he was, looking every bit the stern, disappointed father. "Can I come in?" he asked. I didn't want to let him in, but I also didn't want to have this conversation in the hallway. I stepped aside, and he walked in, looking around like he was judging the state of my apartment. "Dad, I don't have time for this," I said, crossing my arms. "Make time," he shot back. "This has gone on long enough. Your mother is beside herself, and you're acting like a spoiled child. Do you know how much you've hurt her?" I stared at him, dumbfounded. "Hurt her? Dad, I'm the one who's been hurt. For years, I've been sitting at that table, taking their crap, and nobody ever stands up for me. Not you, not Mom, nobody. And now that I finally stand up for myself, I'm the bad guy?" He opened his mouth to argue, but I cut him off. "You don't get to come here and tell me how to feel. Not anymore. If Mom's upset, that's on her. I'm done." He left without another word. I locked the door behind him and leaned against it, feeling a strange mix of relief and sadness. I knew I'd done the right thing, but it didn't make it any easier. For weeks, the messages continued. The letters kept coming, but I didn't respond. Slowly, the flood turned into a trickle, and eventually, it stopped altogether. I don't know if they gave up or just ran out of things to say, but I didn't care. For the first time in years, I felt free. A week after my dad stormed out of my apartment, a letter arrived in the mail. It was formal, more so than any family correspondence I'd ever received. The envelope was crisp and addressed in my mother's neat handwriting. I knew immediately that it wasn't just another guilt trip. I opened it cautiously. Inside was a typed letter on cream-colored paper. The tone was stiff and rehearsed, like it had been drafted by a committee. "Dear Amanda," it began, "your family loves you very much, and we are deeply concerned about the growing distance between us. In light of recent events, we feel it is important to come together and have an open discussion. Please join us for a meeting to address these matters so we can move forward as a family." The letter was signed by my mom, my dad, my brother Thomas, and, to my utter disbelief, Aunt Sarah. I reread the last line twice. "Please let us know when you are available to meet. This is important to all of us." Rachel, as usual, was the first person I called. "This feels like a trap," she said after I read the letter aloud. "They're not looking for reconciliation. They just want to corner you and make you apologize." I knew she was right, but a part of me still wanted to believe they were genuine. Maybe, just maybe, they were finally ready to hear me out. "I'll meet them," I said reluctantly, "but it's going to be on my terms." Rachel sighed but didn't argue. "Fine, but make sure it's somewhere public. You don't want to be trapped in one of their houses." I agreed. I emailed my mom that night, suggesting a neutral cafe in town. She replied almost immediately, agreeing to the location but adding, "We hope you'll come with an open mind and a willingness to listen." That line didn't sit well with me, but I pushed my doubts aside. The day of the meeting, I arrived early, choosing a table near the window where I could see them coming. The cafe was busy enough to feel safe, but not so crowded that we couldn't talk. I ordered a coffee and waited, my stomach churning with nerves. They arrived in a group: my mom, dad, Thomas, and of course, Aunt Sarah. Kelly was noticeably absent, which was both a relief and a curiosity. My mom was the first to spot me. She waved awkwardly before leading the pack to my table. "Hi, Amanda," she said, her voice strained but polite. "Hi," I replied, trying to match her tone. I gestured for them to sit, and they settled around the table, their expressions a mix of discomfort and forced smiles. Aunt Sarah, as usual, was the first to break the silence. "Well, this is nice," she said, folding her hands on the table. "It's good to see you, Amanda. We've missed you." I didn't respond. I wasn't here for small talk. "We wanted to do this because we're worried about you," my mom said, her eyes darting nervously between me and the others. "Things have been tense, and we don't want to lose you." Her words might have carried more weight if they hadn't been followed by Thomas chiming in with, "But you have to admit, Amanda, the way you left Thanksgiving was pretty dramatic." There it was, the passive aggression I'd been expecting. I took a deep breath and reminded myself to stay calm. "I left because I couldn't take it anymore," I said. "Every year, I sit at that table and listen to all of you criticize me. My career, my choices, my life. It's always something. And none of you ever stand up for me." My dad frowned. "Amanda, nobody's criticizing you. We're just trying to help." "Help?" I repeated, incredulous. "By telling me I'm a failure? By making snide comments about my life choices?" Aunt Sarah sighed dramatically. "Amanda, you're too sensitive. We're family. Families tease each other. It's normal." "No, what's normal is respecting each other," I shot back. "What you do isn't teasing. It's bullying." The tension at the table was palpable. My mom looked like she wanted to cry, and Thomas was glaring at me like I just insulted his entire existence. Aunt Sarah, however, stayed calm, eerily calm. "I think you're blowing this out of proportion," she said. "Nobody here wants to hurt you. But maybe you should consider why you're so easily offended." Her words felt like a slap in the face. I looked around the table, hoping for someone, anyone, to defend me. But they all just sat there, silent and complicit. That was the moment I realized I was done. Truly, completely done. "I can't do this anymore," I said, standing up. "I came here hoping you'd understand how much you've hurt me, but it's clear you don't care. All you care about is making me conform to your expectations." "Amanda, wait," my mom pleaded, tears streaming down her face. "We just want things to go back to the way they were." I shook my head. "That's the problem. I don't want things to go back to the way they were. I want a family that respects me, and if you can't do that, then I don't need you in my life." Without another word, I grabbed my coat and walked out of the cafe. I didn't look back. The walk to my car was a blur. My heart was pounding, my hands shaking. I climbed into the driver's seat and sat there for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. When I got home, I called Rachel. "It's over," I said as soon as she answered. "I'm done with them." Rachel didn't say, "I told you so." She just listened as I recounted every painful detail of the meeting. By the time I finished, I felt lighter, like a weight I'd been carrying for years had finally been lifted. That night, I wrote a single email to my family. "I love you, but I can't keep doing this. Until you're ready to respect me and my boundaries, I need space. Please don't contact me unless you're willing to have a real, honest conversation." I hit send and didn't look back. After the cafe meeting, my world felt oddly quiet. The constant tension, the biting remarks, the endless stream of guilt, all of it was gone. For the first time in what felt like forever, I had space to breathe, to think, and to figure out who I was without the weight of my family's expectations dragging me down. It started small. I slept better, not waking up in the middle of the night, replaying their words over and over in my head. I had more energy during the day, and for once, my weekends didn't feel like they were spent recovering from the emotional hangovers they always left me with. One Saturday morning, I looked around my apartment and realized how much I'd let it slip. There were half-finished projects everywhere, canvases leaning against the wall, brushes stiff with dried paint, and an untouched set of watercolors I'd bought years ago but never used. I started with the painting. At first, it felt strange, like I was trying to reconnect with an old friend after years of silence. The brush felt awkward in my hand, and the first few strokes were hesitant, shaky. But as the hours passed, I fell into a rhythm. I lost track of time, and when I finally stepped back to look at the canvas, I saw something I hadn't seen in myself in years: progress. That week, I signed up for a cooking class. It was something I'd always wanted to do but never had the time or the energy for. The class met on Wednesday nights in a cozy little studio downtown. The instructor, Clara, was a whirlwind of energy with flour-dusted hands and a knack for making even the most complicated recipes seem approachable. On the first night, we made fresh pasta, and I found myself laughing more than I had in months as I fumbled with the dough and tried not to make a complete fool of myself. There were 6 other people in the class, and we quickly bonded over our shared culinary disasters. There was Mark, a retired engineer who couldn't boil water without setting off his smoke alarm, Julia, a college student who was there to impress her boyfriend, and Sophie, a single mom who just wanted a night to herself. By the end of the 6-week course, I wasn't just making pasta, I was making friends. At work, things started to change too. Without the constant cloud of family drama hanging over me, I was more focused, more creative, and more confident. My boss, Rachel, no relation to my best friend, noticed the difference immediately. "Amanda, this presentation is incredible," she said one morning after I handed her a proposal for a new project. "This is exactly what we've been looking for." The project was a success, and for the first time in my career, I felt like I was truly being seen for my contributions. A month later, Rachel called me into her office. "I've been really impressed with your work lately," she said, gesturing for me to sit. "We've been looking for someone to take on a leadership role in the new division, and I think you'd be perfect for it." I was stunned. The promotion wasn't just a step up, it was a leap forward, a chance to lead a team and shape the direction of the company. I accepted on the spot. Outside of work, I continued to focus on myself. I started therapy, something Rachel, my best friend, had been nudging me toward for years. My therapist, Dr. Patel, was kind but direct. She didn't let me shy away from the hard questions. "Why do you feel guilty about setting boundaries?" she asked during one of our sessions. "Because it feels selfish," I admitted. "Like I'm abandoning my family." Dr. Patel leaned forward, her expression thoughtful. "Amanda, setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's self-preservation. You can't pour from an empty cup. Taking care of yourself isn't abandoning anyone, it's choosing to love yourself." Her words hit me like a lightning bolt. For so long, I'd been so focused on making everyone else happy that I'd completely neglected my own happiness. Therapy became a lifeline, a safe space where I could unpack years of hurt and start to rebuild. One evening, after a particularly emotional session, I sat down at my easel and painted for hours. The result was a vibrant, chaotic swirl of colors that felt like a visual representation of everything I'd been holding inside. I hung it on the wall in my living room, a reminder of how far I'd come. As the weeks turned into months, I started to feel like a new person, or maybe just a more authentic version of myself. I still thought about my family sometimes, but the memories didn't sting as much. I hadn't heard from them since the email I sent after the cafe meeting, and for the first time, I was okay with that. One night, I invited Rachel over for dinner. We drank wine, laughed, and talked about everything from work to the cooking class to the latest show we were obsessed with. "I'm proud of you," Rachel said as we clinked glasses. "You've come a long way." I smiled, feeling a warmth in my chest that had nothing to do with the wine. For the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. Months had passed since I'd walked away from my family, and in that time, I'd found a rhythm that felt like peace. My days were filled with work, painting, and moments of quiet joy. The sting of their absence had dulled, replaced by a sense of liberation I hadn't known I needed. I didn't think about them much anymore, or at least, I tried not to. But one afternoon, a letter arrived in the mail that brought it all rushing back. The envelope was thick and cream-colored, with my mother's handwriting scrawled across the front. My stomach twisted as I stared at it, debating whether to open it or toss it in the trash. Curiosity won out. I ripped it open, expecting another passive-aggressive guilt trip. Instead, what I found stopped me in my tracks. "Amanda," it began, "I know I've hurt you. I've spent months replaying everything I said, everything I did, and I see now how unfair I've been to you. I let other people's opinions cloud my judgment, and I didn't stand up for you the way a mother should. I'm sorry. Truly, deeply sorry." The letter went on, detailing moments I'd long buried. Times when she'd stayed silent as Aunt Sarah criticized me. Times when she'd brushed off my hurt as oversensitivity. For the first time, she acknowledged the damage her inaction had caused. "I miss you," she wrote. "Your father misses you. We want to make things right, but we don't know how. If you're willing, we'd like to meet with a therapist to work through this together. I know we have a lot to make up for, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes." I set the letter down, my hands trembling. It was the apology I'd been longing for, yet I wasn't sure how to feel. Could I trust it? Was this another attempt to pull me back into their orbit? I called Rachel, my unwavering voice of reason. "What if they're serious this time?" I asked her after reading the letter aloud. Rachel was quiet for a moment. "It sounds sincere," she said finally. "But you don't owe them anything, Amanda. If you do decide to meet them, make sure it's on your terms." I thought about it for days, weighing the risk of reopening old wounds against the possibility of genuine healing. In the end, I replied to my mother's letter with one of my own. I agreed to meet, but only if a therapist was present to mediate. The therapy session was scheduled for a Wednesday evening at a small office downtown. I arrived early, my heart pounding as I sat in the waiting room. The therapist, Dr. Warner, was a soft-spoken woman in her 40s with a calm demeanor that immediately put me at ease. She explained how the session would work, emphasizing that everyone would have a chance to speak without interruption. When my parents walked in, I felt a mix of emotions: nerves, anger, even a flicker of hope. My mom looked tired, her face lined with worry. My dad seemed uncomfortable, his usual confidence replaced with uncertainty. They sat down across from me, and for a moment, nobody spoke. Dr. Warner broke the silence. "Thank you all for being here. This is a safe space where we can be honest about our feelings and work toward understanding each other. Amanda, since this meeting was your family's idea, would you like to start?" I hesitated, then nodded. "I've spent my whole life feeling like I wasn't enough for this family," I said, my voice trembling. No matter what I did, it was never good enough. Every decision I made was criticized, every accomplishment overshadowed by what I hadn't done yet. And when I finally stood up for myself, I was treated like the problem. Tears blurred my vision, but I pushed through. I needed space because I couldn't keep hurting myself to keep the peace. I didn't walk away because I don't love you. I walked away because I do. My mom was crying by the time I finished. "Amanda, I'm so sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "I didn't realize how much I was hurting you. I thought I was protecting you by pushing you to be better, but I see now that I was only tearing you down." My dad cleared his throat. "I should have stood up for you more," he admitted. "I let things slide because I didn't want to rock the boat, but that wasn't fair to you." Hearing their apologies was both healing and painful. For so long, I'd wanted them to acknowledge the hurt they'd caused, but now that they were, I didn't know what to do with it. Dr. Warner guided us through the conversation, helping us unpack years of miscommunication and unmet expectations. My mom admitted that she'd always felt pressure to present a perfect family image, which made her hypercritical of anything that didn't fit that mold. My dad confessed that his silence was rooted in fear of confrontation, a trait he'd inherited from his own father. And I shared how their actions had shaped my insecurities, leaving me feeling isolated and unworthy of love. By the end of the session, we were emotionally drained but also lighter, like a weight had been lifted. Before we left, Dr. Warner suggested setting boundaries to ensure our relationship could move forward in a healthy way. I agreed to limited communication at first, weekly phone calls with my mom, text with my dad, and made it clear that any criticism or guilt-tripping would result in immediate disengagement. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a start. Over the next few weeks, we slowly began to rebuild. My mom kept her promise, respecting my boundaries and focusing on positive conversations instead of picking apart my life. My dad, true to form, kept things light, sharing funny stories and updates about the garden he'd recently started. It was strange, but also comforting, to feel like we were finally finding common ground. We continued therapy as a family, meeting with Dr. Warner once a month to check in and address any lingering issues. Aunt Sarah and Kelly didn't participate, which was a blessing. I wasn't ready to deal with them yet. For now, it was enough to focus on my parents and the progress we were making. One evening, after a particularly good phone call with my mom, I sat down to paint. As the colors blended together on the canvas, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. I knew there was still work to be done, but for the first time, I felt like healing was truly possible.